The prairie at dawn carried a silence so sharp it could cut through bone. The horizon stretched endless and bare, streaked with a thin band of crimson where the sun tried to rise against the weight of the clouds. A cabin sat alone in that wilderness, its wood weathered, its chimney coughing out the last of last night's fire. Inside, two children sat hunched together on a rough bench, whispering words they had said so many times the sound no longer seemed real. "Our mamma went to get food," the younger said, voice trembling. "She never came back." The man who heard them was no blood of theirs, though fate had tangled his steps into their story. He stood by the door, shoulders bent, one hand resting on the worn stock of a rifle. His face carried the years carved deep by sun and sorrow, eyes the color of ash after fire has burned too long. He listened, but he did not answer right away. There was weight in silence, and sometimes words needed to settle like dust before truth could follow. At last, he turned, kneeling so his gaze leveled with theirs. "Then I'll find her," he said, voice steady though inside it shook with memories he had buried for years. "And I'll protect." The promise was not one he made lightly. He had sworn once, long ago, to protect another. He had failed. That failure had cost him everything: land, family, purpose. Now, with these children looking at him as if he were iron instead of flesh, he felt that old scar ache as if it had only just been cut. But he did not flinch. The boy, perhaps 12, carried himself like someone already too used to loss. The girl, no more than 9, leaned against her brother but kept her eyes sharp and fixed on the man. Both of them wanted to believe, yet both feared belief itself might betray them. Outside, the land waited with its cruelty. The late summer heat was broken by sudden storms, and the earth, though wide, offered little mercy. The nearest town was 3 days' ride, a town that had no room for strays orphans. Bandits drifted along the trails like wolves, preying on the weak. Even settlers, neighbors in name, could turn hostile if they smelled desperation. Yet the man knew the greater danger lay not in strangers but in the silence of the plains, where hunger grew louder than conscience. If the women had gone for food and not returned, something stronger than mere hardship had stopped her. The children followed him when he stepped outside, their small boots crunching over the dry dirt. He tested the air as though it carried answers, then lowered himself to the ground, tracing faint impressions left in the soil. A wagon had passed, heavy and hurried, its wheels cutting deep. Nearby, scraps of cloth fluttered from a thorn bush, pale blue against the thorns. He touched it, his jaw tightening. It was not proof, but it was sign enough to stir the unease already simmering in him. He told the children to gather what little they had. They obeyed without question, though fear shadowed their movements. Inside, they packed a tin cup, a threadbare blanket, and a half-empty pouch of dried beans. The boy carried them like treasures, while the girl clutched a small wooden doll, her knuckles white. He watched them, and for the first time in years he felt the heaviness of responsibility fall fully across his shoulders. It was not land or cattle he bore now, but lives. He wondered if he was worthy of that burden, or if the past would find a way to make him fail again. By midday, they set out, leaving the cabin behind like a ghost that had already given up its fight. The sun bore down without mercy, and the prairie wind dragged dust across their faces. He carried the rifle in one hand and guided the children with the other. Their small steps tried to match his long strides, but he slowed himself, sensing the quiet determination in them. They did not complain, though sweat stung their eyes and their mouths went dry. That silence reminded him of himself, years ago, when he too had walked with no one to guide him but the will to keep moving. The trail grew harsher as the hours passed. They came across rattlesnakes sunning themselves on the rocks, their rattles buzzing a warning that kept the children close. The sky thickened with gray, and by afternoon a storm broke loose, thunder rolling like cannons across the heavens. Rain slashed their skin, cold and heavy, turning dirt into muck. The children stumbled, shivering, but he lifted them both, pushing forward until he found a hollow beneath a ridge. There, they huddled together, and he shielded them with his broad frame, letting the storm beat against his back. The boy asked then, almost a whisper, "Do you think she's alive?" The man closed his eyes. He wanted to offer comfort, but he would not lie. Lies were a poison that made hope rot. "I don't know," he answered. The girl began to cry softly, and the sound was sharper to him than any thunder. He reached for her hand, awkward but firm, and held it until her sobs eased. When she looked up at him, he saw not just a child, but a reflection of every soul left behind in this harsh country, waiting for someone who might never return. That night, the fire they built was small, just enough to keep the chill at bay. Sparks floated upward into the dark like lost prayers. He sat awake long after the children had fallen asleep, the rifle across his knees, eyes never leaving the horizon. Shadows moved in the distance. Coyotes, maybe, or men. Out here, it was hard to tell the difference. His chest tightened with that old familiar fear, the one that whispered he would fail them as he had failed before. He clenched his jaw and forced himself to breathe. This was not then. This was now. And he had made a vow. At dawn, they move again, their clothes damp, their feet heavy. The prairie seemed endless, each revealing nothing but another stretch of barren land. Yet he pressed on, following the faint trail the wagon had carved. The children walked beside him, their eyes scanning the ground with sharpness born of desperation. When the girl pointed to a scrap of fabric snagged on a mesquite branch, his heart lurched. It matched the woman's dress, blue patterned with white flowers. The boy touched it gently, lips pressed tight, as if afraid to breathe. The trail led them deeper into country known for danger. The man considered turning back more than once. The land itself seemed to resist them. Thorns tore at their clothes, the sun beat mercilessly, and water was scarce. Yet each time doubt rose. He looked at the children, and the doubt faltered. They were too young to walk this far, yet they did not ask him to carry them. They simply followed, step by step, trusting that his promise was stronger than their fear. That night, when they made camp near a dry creek bed, he felt eyes upon them. The firelight reached only so far, and beyond its edge the darkness breathed with unseen life. He sat with his back to the children, rifle ready, his senses straining. Once, he thought he saw movement, the glint of something reflecting firelight. A man, perhaps, or perhaps only his mind conjuring phantoms from old wounds. But when the children stirred in their sleep, clutching at each other, he felt again the truth of his vow. He would not let them vanish into the silence like so many before. The next morning, as they climbed a ridge, the boy froze, pointing to the valley below. The man's eyes followed, narrowing. Far off, barely visible, lay the remains of a wagon. Its frame was splintered, its wheels broken. Buzzards circled above. The girl gasped, clutching her doll tight. He rested a hand on her shoulder, steadying her, though inside his chest a storm raged. The mother might have been here. She might still be near. He scanned the ground, searching for more than wreckage, for any sign of life or death. What he found instead was uncertainty. Tracks led away from the wagon, many boots, heavy and deliberate. Whoever had taken the woman had not left her to die alone. That was a curse and a blessing both. He rose slowly, the rifle in his grip, the children pressed close to his sides. The valley stretched out before them like an open wound, raw and dangerous. He could feel it now, the beginning of something larger than he had expected, a pull toward conflict that would test not just his strength, but his very soul. He looked down at the children, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for direction. For a moment he saw himself reflected in their fear and their hope, and he understood that this journey was no longer just about finding a missing woman. It was about facing the shadows he had run from for too long. The wind rose, carrying with it the smell of smoke from far away, and with it came the certainty that they were not alone on this trail. He tightened his grip on the rifle and drew the children close. The promise he had spoken in that cabin had now grown heavier, yet sharper, like a blade forged in fire. He whispered it again, not to them this time, but to himself, as if the words might anchor him against the storm to come. "I'll find her," he said, voice rough but unbroken, "and I'll protect." They stepped forward, leaving the ridge behind, walking toward the valley and whatever lay waiting in its depths. The land swallowed them, and the silence of the plains pressed close once more, broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the echo of a vow that would demand more than any of them yet understood. The valley opened before them like a wound that refused to heal, the wreckage of the wagon sitting broken at its heart. The man stood with the children pressed close against him, his eyes scanning every ridge, every shadow, every circling buzzard. He did not speak. Words were useless when danger could be listening. The boy's hand clutched the hem of his coat while the girl's fingers dug into his sleeve. each of them waiting for him to decide if this valley would be a grave or a path. He crouched low, tracing the earth with a calloused hand. The prints were clear, too many feet, heavy and purposeful. Whoever had taken the woman had moved her quickly, and not alone. He rose slowly, his jaw tight, the weight of the decision pressing against him like the sky itself. He could turn back, lead the children to safety, or he could follow these tracks into whatever hell waited ahead. His promise left no room for retreat. They descended cautiously. Buzzards scattered as they approached, wings black against the gray sky. The wagon was stripped bare, no food, no blankets, nothing but splintered wood and clawed earth. The girl pressed her face into the wooden doll she carried, muffling a sob. The boy clenched his fists, eyes burning with something between grief and fury. The man knelt beside them, his voice quiet but unyielding. "She's not here. That means she's alive." The words were not a certainty, but they steadied the children, and for now that was enough. He led them away from the wreck, following the tracks that pulled east, deeper into the wild where few dared travel. The land grew harsher with every mile. Thick mesquite clawed at their clothes, and dry gullies cut across their path. They carried little water, and by midday thirst gnawed at their throats. Still, the children refused to ask for rest, their small faces hardened by fear and stubbornness. The man noticed, and for the first time in years he felt something stir beneath the layers of grief that had hardened around him. Pride, perhaps, or the echo of hope. Yet along with it came dread. Hope was fragile, and the land was merciless. By dusk, they reached a rise where the tracks scattered, as if the captors had tried to confuse any who might follow. He crouched again, studying the date. His fingers moved across faint impressions, the heel of the boot, the drag of weight. He closed his eyes, listening to the silence, and when he opened them, he chose a path north. The boy asked why, his voice steady but curious. The man answered simply, "Because it feels right." He offered no more. Instinct was all he had left, and he trusted it more than logic. That night, they built a fire so small it was little more than an ember. The children huddled close, eating the last of the beans they had carried. The girl whispered stories to her doll while the boy stared at the flames, his jaw set like a man grown. The man watched them both, then turned his eyes outward. The prairie was too quiet. Coyote should have called, owl should have hunted. Instead, the night lay heavy, still as death. His hand never left the rifle. It was near midnight when he saw it, a figure on the ridge, half hidden by moonlight. Tall, motionless, watching. His finger tightened on the trigger, but he did not fire. The figure did not move closer, nor away. The children stirred, sensing his tension. "What is it?" the boy whispered. "Nothing yet," the man replied, though his chest ached with unease. The figure remained until dawn began to bleed across the horizon, then vanished as if the land had swallowed it whole. When they set out again, the children whispered about the shadow they had seen, fear and curiosity tangled in their voices. The man said little, though his thoughts circled it endlessly. He knew enough of this land to recognize a watcher when he saw one, and watchers never came without reason. Still, he pushed forward. The tracks grew clearer now, fresher, as though their quarry was closer than before. Each print carried them further from safety, but closer to answers. By the third day, the prairie gave way to broken canyons, their walls jagged and red. The trail wound between them, narrow and treacherous. The man slowed, his instinct sharp as a blade. He felt the air change, thick with danger. He ordered the children to stay close, his voice low and firm. They obeyed, their eyes wide, sensing what he felt. It happened fast. A shout echoed, and from the cliffs above, men appeared, rifles raised. Bandits, faces hidden by dust and greed. The man shoved the children behind a rock, dropping to one knee as bullets shattered the silence. The crack of gunfire ricocheted through the canyon, deafening. He returned fire, each shot deliberate, forcing the attackers to scatter. Dust filled the air, choking and blinding, the children clutching each other as a world erupted around them. One bandit rushed from the shadows, knife glinting. The man swung the rifle like a club, the steel cracking against bone, dropping the attacker to the date. Another came from behind, but before the man could turn, an arrow whistled through the air, striking the bandit in the chest. The attacker fell, gasping, blood staining the dust. The man froze, eyes snapping to the ridge. There, standing tall with bow in hand, was the same figure from a night before. The stranger did not speak. His expression was unreadable, his stance calm and steady. He loosed another arrow, driving the bandits back into the shadows. Silence fell heavy as the last of them fled, their curses echoing off stone. The man breathed hard, chest burning, but he kept the children close. He looked up at the stranger, rifle still raised, uncertain if he faced a savior or a new threat. The stranger descended with measured steps, a warrior's grace in every movement. He wore the marks of people the frontier had pushed to the edge, his dark eyes sharp, his bow steady. He stopped a short distance away, neither threatening nor yielding. The girl, trembling, stepped forward first. She held out a scrap of bread from her pocket, her small hand shaking. The warrior's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, and he accepted it with a nod. No words passed between them, yet something unspoken settled in the air. The man lowered his rifle slowly, though suspicion still coiled within him. "You knew they'd come," he said, voice flat. The warrior gave no answer, only lifted a hand, pointing further east. Then, without waiting, he turned and walked that way, his steps certain, silent. The children looked to the man, their eyes pleading. He cursed under his breath, then motioned for them to follow. The path grew harsher as they pressed on, jagged rocks cutting their boots, the sun burning overhead. The warrior moved like a shadow, always ahead, pausing only to glance back, ensuring they kept pace. The man hated the feeling of reliance, hated that his promise now depended on another. Yet each time he considered turning away, the children's faces steeled his resolve. That night, they camped again. The warrior remained apart, sitting near the edge of the fire's glow, sharpening his blade. The children whispered questions the man did not answer. Where had he come from? Why did he help? What did he want? The man watched him, suspicion battling with gratitude. Finally, when the children had drifted to sleep, he spoke quietly across the flames. "If you know where she is, tell me." The warrior lifted his gaze, silent, then drew a line in the dirt with his knife. At the end of that line, he pressed the blade deep, leaving it quivering. Then he leaned back, eyes never leaving the man's. The message was clear enough. Blood would mark the end of this path. Morning brought no answers, only more miles. The children grew quieter, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them. The boy began watching the warrior more than the man, studying his movements, the way he read the land, the way he wasted no step. The girl, too, seemed less afraid now, as if she trusted the silent figure more than she dared trust hope itself. The man noticed and felt a sting he did not expect. He had promised to protect, yet already their faith leaned toward another. By the 5th day, their supplies were nearly gone. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, exhaustion dulled their steps. Still, the tracks remained clear, fresher with each mile. The man felt the noose tightening. Whoever held the woman was close, and they would not give her up easily. His chest tightened with a fear he refused to name, the fear of failing again, of making promises his soul could not keep. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, they found it, a bonnet, torn and bloodstained, caught on a thorn bush. The girl cried out, clutching it as if it were her mother's hand. The boy's face hardened, tears burning but unshed. The man's throat closed, his heart hammering with equal parts dread and determination. He took the bonnet gently, holding it as if it might break. Then he looked east, toward the growing darkness, and knew the next step would decide everything. The warrior stood silent, watching him, eyes unreadable. The man met that gaze, and for the first time, he did not see a stranger. He saw an ally, bound not by words but by the harsh truth of survival. He nodded once. The warrior returned the gesture, then turned his eyes to the horizon. The man drew the children close, their small bodies trembling against him. He tucked the bonnet into his coat, a reminder of the promise that now burned hotter than ever. They would press on, no matter the cost. The land, the bandits, the silence of the plains, all of it would stand in their way. But he would not stop. Not now. And as the night swallowed them whole, the vow he had spoken in the cabin echoed once more, louder than the fear in his chest. He would find her, and he would protect. The thorn bush with its blood-stained bonnet haunted them through the night. The children clung to the man's sides as they walked, their steps light but their breaths heavy. The warrior moved ahead like a shadow of the land itself, his body blending into stone and brush, never speaking, only guiding. Every mile east deepened the silence between them, not the silence of strangers, but the silence of those bracing for what they knew was coming. The man's chest ached with every step, as if his vow weighed more with each heartbeat. He had said he would find her, that he would protect, and now the bonnet told him that he was close to the moment when words would either become truth or die with him in the dust. By dawn they reached a ridge where smoke rose thin from below. The warrior crouched low, motioning with 2 fingers for them to stop. The man dropped beside him, peering down into the valley. A cluster of settlers' shacks huddled around a corral, men moving among them with rifles slung casually, though their eyes were sharp even from a distance. The children pressed against him, their hands clutching his coat, and he felt their trembling pulse through his own skin. His gaze caught on a figure near the corral, thin, her hair tangled, her dress torn. Even from afar, even broken by distance, he knew it was her, alive, but caged like stock. The boy whispered, "Mama," his voice tight with a sound too old for his age. The girl buried her face into the man's side, as though afraid her hope might shatter if she looked too long. The man's jaw clenched, his eyes burning, but he kept his breathing steady. He studied the armed men, their careless laughter, their guarded watch. He had seen that kind before, men who thought survival gave them the right to own what they could not earn. To them, a starving woman was not a neighbor but a possession. They pulled back from the ridge. The warrior's eyes flicked to the children, then back to the man. He drew a line in the date, placing stones along it like sentries, then stabbed a knife into the final mound. His meaning was plain. Blood weighted between here and her freedom. The man stared at the line, his chest heaving with a storm inside him. He had failed once before, had walked into fire and come out with ashes where life should have been. To bring these children into danger again felt like betrayal of the very vow he had spoken. Yet their mother was down there. If he turned away now, his promise would be as hollow as the men's laughter below. As twilight bled into night, they made their plan. The warrior would move first, silent as shadow, cutting down the sentries in the dark. The man would follow, rifle ready, his task to reach the woman and get her clear. The children were ordered to stay hidden among the rocks until he returned for them. The boy tried to protest, his face fierce with the fire of someone too young to know the cost of courage, but the man silenced him with a hand on his shoulder. "You're brave," he whispered, voice thick, "but brave doesn't mean reckless. Your strength tonight is in waiting." The boy swallowed hard, but nodded, though the resentment in his eyes told of how deeply he wanted to stand beside him. The girl clutched the doll, her silence more eloquent than words. The night wrapped the valley in darkness. The fire in the settlers' camp burned low, casting long shadows. The warrior vanished into the gloom, and moments later, a faint rustle told of his silent passage. Then came a muffled gasp, a thud of body against dirt. Another shadow fell, another sentry's silence without cry. The man's heart pounded like war drums, each beat louder as he crept forward. His boots kissed the earth without sound, his rifle held tight, his eyes never leaving the corral where the woman lay. A sudden shout split the silence. A guard stumbled upon the fallen, and chaos erupted. The camp burst awake, rifles raised, voices cutting through the night. The man cursed under his breath and fired. The shot cracked, echoing through the canyon, dropping one settler but drawing every eye. The warrior answered with arrows loose in rapid silence, cutting down 2 more, but their advantage of surprise was gone. Men poured from the shacks, bullets whining past in the dark. The man sprinted, ducking behind a trough, firing again, each shot deliberate, each breath a fight to stay alive. The warrior moved like water, blade flashing, bow bending, his strikes precise and merciless. But numbers pressed heavy, and for every man who fell, another seemed to rise from the shadows. The children, hidden on the ridge, pressed their hands over their mouths to hold back cries as fire exploded below. The man reached the corral. The woman staggered to her feet, eyes wide with disbelief. Her lips formed his name, though she had never spoken it before. He smashed the lock with his rifle, but, dragging the gate open, she stumbled into his arms, trembling, light as a wisp. Her eyes darted to the fight raging around them, to the warrior who cut down another man, to the flame spreading where a lantern had fallen. "The children," she gasped, her voice raw. "Are they safe?" He tightened his grip on her, forcing steadiness into his words. Safe, but not if we don't move. A bullet tore past his shoulder, grazing his arm. Pain flared hot, but he shoved her behind cover. Another settler charged, shotgun raised. The man fired first, the blast throwing the body backward into the date. He could feel his strength ebbing, but the promise in his chest burned brighter. He pulled her toward the ridge, step by step, each movement a war against a hail of gunfire. The warrior covered their retreat, his arrow spent now, blade slick in his hand. 3 men circled him, rifle swinging. He met them head-on, striking with fury born of silence, cutting through the first, grappling the second. The third fired, the shot grazing his side, but he did not fall. His cry was not rage, but the sound of survival itself, raw and unbroken. The man reached the rocks where the children waited. Their cries broke free at the sight of their mother, and she collapsed into them, her arms wrapping tight, sobs shuddering through her body. The man allowed one heartbeat of relief, then pulled them all low. "Not yet," he hissed. "Not yet." The settlers rallied below, voices shouting, firelight spreading. More were coming, drawn by the noise, drawn by the blood. The warrior staggered back to them, blood staining his side, his eyes still sharp. He met the man's gaze and gave the smallest nod, a command without words. The man understood. This was no longer a fight they could win. This was flight or death. They climbed through the rocks, the children clinging to their mother, the warrior covering their flank, the man leading with rifle raised. Bullets chipped stone, sparks leaping as iron kissed rock. They moved higher, scrambling, slipping, the night alive with a hunt behind them. The man's lungs burned, his wounded arm heavy, but he did not falter. The promise was iron in his bones, dragging him forward. At last, they crested the ridge, the land stretching wide and dark beyond. The settlers shouted below, their torches flickering, but they did not climb. The fight had blooded them, and in the darkness they feared chasing too far. The man stood on the ridge, rifle raised, daring them to try. For long moments, no one moved. Then, slowly, the torches retreated, their curses carried away by the wind. Silence fell heavy again, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. The woman clung to her children, their sobs muffled against her chest. The warrior leaned against a stone, blood dripping steady from his side, though his expression betrayed no weakness. The man lowered his rifle, his whole body trembling as the weight of what they had done sank deep. They had won, yet what they carried now was heavier than victory. When dawn came, the light revealed their wounds. The woman was frail, her face hollowed by hunger, but her eyes burned with the fierce love of a mother who had survived for the sake of her children. The children themselves clung to her, their joy shadowed by the memory of what they had seen. The warrior bound his wound with strips of cloth, silent, steady, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The man stood apart, staring out across the land, the rifle heavy in his hands. He thought of his promise. He had found her. He had protected. But protection was not just battle, not just blood. It was a road after, the path that stretched beyond fire and gunpowder. The children looked at him now with gratitude that cut deep, and the woman's eyes carried a question she did not speak. Would he stay? Would he be the husband, the father, the shield? He looked at them, then at the warrior who had fought beside him without word or debt. He saw the bond between mother and children, fierce and unbreakable. He knew then that his place was not to take what was theirs, but to ensure they reached a place where they could live without fear. His heart yearned for belonging, but his soul knew his role. He was a protector, not a claimant. When they walked again, it was with the children at the center, the mother beside them, the warrior a silent shadow at their flank, and the man ahead, watching, guiding. Each step carried them away from the valley, away from the fire, away from the past. Yet not every shadow could be left behind. The man carried his vow like a scar, never healed, never forgotten, but proof of what he had chosen. At a bend in the trail, the warrior stopped. He looked at the man, eyes deep as the earth, and gave a single nod. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into the wild, vanishing as quietly as he had come. The man watched him go, a pang of loss twisting in his chest. But he understood. Some spirits belonged only to the land, and some bonds needed no words to endure. They pressed on until the sun hung high, until the land before them widened into plains free of smoke and fire. The children's laughter returned in small bursts, fragile but real. The woman walked lighter now, her arms steady around them. The man lingered a few paces behind, his eyes ever on the horizon. When the girl turned back and called, "Come with us," his heart cracked with longing. But he smiled softly, shaking his head. He knew where his road ended. He would walk with them until they were safe, but not beyond. His vow had been to protect, and that vow had been kept. To stay longer would be to break it in another way, to claim what was not his. And so he carried his silence, his rifle, and the scar of his choice. The wind rose, carrying with it the smell of new grass, not smoke. The man breathed deep, the weight in his chest shifting, not gone but lighter. He had failed once long ago, but not this time. Not here. And though he would not walk beside them forever, he knew that somewhere in their memory his promise would live. That was enough. As the sun dipped westward, they kept walking, their figures small against the endless land, their shadows long, their path uncertain. But in their steps was survival, and in their silence was trust. And for a man who had once thought himself broken, that trust was the truest reckoning, the clearest choice.